Hello, in this video I'm gonna do a magical musical moments on Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane. Okay, and I'm talking in a sense about this double A side single. This is I think an original Strawberry Fields Forever. Okay, if you have got any original singles, by the way, it is actually quite useful to keep the original sleeves they came in. Okay, I'm not quite sure if this is the exact original for this one. The record collector guide has pictures of the actual sleeves, but anyway, it's a nice sort of thing to have, and if you want the value of them, then the original sleeves are pretty much essential. As you can see, I've got a new actual sleeve for it to go in, but the original sleeve is still there, and those things are the things that make them collectible, so don't throw those away. Okay, yeah, this came out as a double A-sided single in the UK. It was recorded towards the end of 1966 and sort of after Revolver, and it was sort of released about February, I think 1967, January, February 1967. Okay, I think Strawberry Fields Forever may have been slated for inclusion on the whatever their next album was going to be at the time. But by the time that Sgt. Pepper came along, I think the distance between the release of this and the release of Sgt. Pepper meant that it wasn't really suited for inclusion on the album, and plus it had been released as a single anyway. But Strawberry Fields Forever had a stereo mix done in the 1960s, in 67 I think, or 66 or something like that, I don't know. But and I've lost, well not lost, but I can't lay my hands on my studio recording book, otherwise I would have told you. And Penny Lane, I don't think was given a stereo mix during the Beatles' lifetime. I think the first stereo mix of it in the UK appeared on the Blue 1967 to 1970 album, but it's a myriad of complications. I've got the American vinyl release of this on Capitol, of that Blue album on Capitol. You can hear it playing I'm the Walrus on one of my Rager videos. But on that version, it's a fake stereo of Penny Lane. Okay, the Americans decided that when Magical Mystery Tour came out, which was even after Sgt. Pepper, so a good deal of time later, they decided to compile Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane and a few of the other singles, like All You Need Is Love and Hello Goodbye, onto the B-side of it, whereas the Magical Mystery Tour that came out in the UK came out as an EP with just the Magical Mystery Tour songs on it. Okay, and again, the Americans had a fake stereo, which is a slightly different mix from the one that's on the 1967 to 70 Capitol album. So yeah, it's a myriad of complications. Strawberry Fields Forever was given, as I say, a stereo mix in the late 60s, which the Americans took for the Blue 67 to 70 album, and I think the Magical Mystery Tour album. Okay, but then in 1971, after the Beatles had split up, Strawberry Fields was given another stereo mix, which was supposedly to improve on the famous George Martin edit, which I'll talk about later on in Strawberry Fields Forever. And yeah, the original 60s stereo mix of Strawberry Fields is quite hard to find now. You have to actually go back to the vinyl editions, because all the CDs now use the 71 mix. I think I'm right in saying that. It's really confusing. There is a website which I might try and find and put a link in down below that sort of gives all the gen on it, but it's quite a complicated thing to try and sort out. Okay, so in this video I want to talk really about tension. Okay, now in the past I've talked a lot about tension in between chord structure and melody and lyrics, i.e., for example, happy lyrics against jarring chords, for example, or the other way round, jarring lyrics against happy chords, like Imagine, for example. But in this case here, the real tension that's coming in, and also the thing which I think alienated a lot of the early sort of Beatles fans that have been, sort of swept along with the Hard Day's Night-esque type of, Beatles thing, scream along and throw your knickers out. Those people were sort of becoming slightly alienated by a lot of what was going on with the Beatles, because, essentially they were getting too weird, in quotes, okay? And the kind of what was happening, what they were seeing, were the essential differences between Paul McCartney's approach to songwriting and John Lennon's. Okay, and so the tension in these songs is actually coming from the two different viewpoints of the two main songwriters, and it is important, therefore, to take this single as a whole. Okay, and to put it in the context of how it was originally intended, which was a single, a double A-sided single, okay, and not a compilation thing on an album, okay. And by the way, just going back to that, this is mono, okay. All singles were released in mono, at least in the UK, in the 1960s. So yeah, if we take the two as a whole, both of them were heavily influenced by certain hallucinogenic drugs. I'm going to say right now that I don't approve of drug taking, and it's not something that I've indulged in. But the Beatles did, okay, and John Lennon in particular allowed things to get out of control, particularly by the end of the 1960s. He and Yoko were, really in a bit of a screwed up state on stronger stuff than they were using here. Okay, so although there is this influence of drugs, okay, from the sort of happy-go-lucky approach that Paul McCartney took to the memories of his childhood, okay, both of them had lost their mothers. Okay, John lost his because his mother was run over by a drunk policeman who was driving a vehicle. Okay, he was off duty and he was driving a vehicle whilst drunk. Great example set by the Bobbies on the Beat or whatever. Paul McCartney lost his mother to illness. Okay, Paul McCartney's song is a happy-go-lucky kind of reflection upon the upon his childhood pre the loss of his mother. Okay, John Lennon's, you get the feeling that his childhood and the unhappiness of his childhood is what is influencing his state of being at that moment in time. So his is a now looking back and a sense of total alienation in childhood is what is influencing him right now. Paul McCartney's is is a kind of sort of happy-go-lucky sort of wasn't it all lovely kind of thing. Wasn't everything in the garden lovely prior to the loss of his mother. Okay, I don't really want to say too much, just in case Paul McCartney is actually watching, which would be be an absolute miracle. But there you go. All right. So you straight away you have this contrast, okay? But although the drugs were influencing the songs, it's actually Paul McCartney's song, which probably it is more spaced out. John Lennon was kind of sort of pigeonholed as writing a lot of nonsense verse around this time. We've got Strawberry Fields, we've got Lucy in the Sky, we've got I Am the Walrus, okay? And actually, although John Lennon's song sounds more sort of spaced out and nonsensical, and the backing is, you know, kind of, you know, especially where it all gets all scrambled at the end, is kind of, you know, reinforcing that, stripped apart and looked at in the context of what was going on in his life at that time, it's actually probably the more real, in quotes, of the two songs. Okay, so, you know, let's get right into it then. Okay, first of all, we need to look at the musical structure of Strawberry Fields. Okay, Strawberry Fields has an introduction, and I'm getting the sheet music here. The best version of Strawberry Fields can be found in this book, which is called The Beatles Fantasy. Okay, compilation of their wackier songs. All right, includes I Am the Walrus and the other one, Lucy in the Sky, as well. Doesn't include Penny Lane, funnily enough. This has got the best version of it. Okay. Now, the introduction of Strawberry Fields is a total summing up of the verse of Strawberry Fields, okay? And if I just swizzle you over to my piano. Here's your introduction to Strawberry Fields. Okay, so there's your introduction. That is a nice, neat summary of the verse, which starts at the "Living is easy with eyes closed" part. Okay, and you can actually hear the same introduction. It's kind of been expanded. It's made a bit, the phrase has been made a bit longer. But here we go. Living is easy with eyes closed. Okay, so there's the beginning of the introduction. Okay, and then we have the end of it, okay, which comes in "It Doesn't Matter Much to Me." Okay, so all the bit about misunderstanding all you see and it's getting hard to be someone, but it all works out. That's the extension. Okay, the introduction kind of finishes at "It doesn't matter much to me." And then we're into the chorus. Okay, so it's actually very sort of economical use of essentially the same idea of that musical phrase. Okay, in the verse is very nicely. No, what am I thinking of here? I'm now thinking of the chorus, and where am I looking? Okay, the chorus is nicely summoned up by this little phrase here. Okay, that quick quaver phrase there, when slowed down and embellished, is actually the chorus. Okay, because here, that's the first three notes of that little quaver pattern. Slow it down. You've got "Let me take you down." Okay, then the next three notes, which are a G, E and a D. So, okay, the G, E, D. Okay, Strawberry Fields. Okay, and that's your G and E. Okay, and nothing to get hung about. Okay, so you've got that, those 8 notes are kind of being used in the chorus. Okay, and then they're taken out. Okay, in the first stereo mix, the 60s stereo mix of that phrase, which is played on, I think it's an Indian instrument, it's called something like I don't know, I'm not even going to say it because I don't know what it's called, but it's a kind of Indian instrument, a plucked Indian instrument. It sort of crosses the stereo stage from right to left, I think. Okay, at the very end of the first time that that's played, you can hear, if you listen carefully, that a plectrum was actually dropped onto it, and there's a little giggle after it as well. So you hear this sort of clank, okay, and a giggle heard in the background, so you have to listen out carefully for that. Alright, so essentially, there is your musical material, okay? We also have, as a little trick at the time, because you know they were getting into all sorts of bizarre studio effects and what have you, we also have lots of backward cymbals and things, and those are keeping this very steady, what we call a crotchet pulse, i.e. one beat per time. That shoo, 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 shoo. Okay, and that is essentially the makeup of the musical background to Strawberry Fields. All right, there's a very famous story that John recorded two versions of this song. One which he liked, which was a quite heavy sort of arrangement, which focused, you know, very much on, you know, the drums, guitars, sort of, you know, rock sound. Okay, and another one which was more biased towards orchestral arrangements, and they were both done in different keys. I don't know which keys they were done in, okay, but John said he liked bits of both of them, and could George Martin put the two together, and George Martin said no, they're at different speeds in different keys, and John said yes, you can, and so George Martin essentially did it, as it were, and the main cut that he made was in the second Let Me Take You Down part, okay, and in the 60s stereo mix you can hear it very, very clearly. If you listen on the right hand side, during that Let Me Take You Down, an orchestra just sort of comes in from more or less out of nowhere. You've got a virtually noiseless right hand channel, okay, and then suddenly this orchestra comes in from nowhere, as it were, nowhere in quotes, which is from the second take, okay, so you know, that's probably spoilt it for you now. I didn't mean to do that, but it's an interesting thing. There is the Beatles Anomalies website, which I've talked about before, so it's called What Goes On, so if you can find that, again, that's a really interesting thing. It'll tell you the whole story and the whole of the anomalies on that album, on that song, which I've kind of forgotten now. All right, but that essential speeding up and slowing down has made all the instruments, even the real ones, the drums, the guitars, and what have you, sound sort of vaguely spaced out and wiggy. Okay, John's vocal in some places really sounds like he's sort of half asleep, and sort of, because again of the speeding up and slowing down of the two tracks to get them into the same key. When you increase the speed, you're making the pitch higher. When you slow down the speed of tape, you're making it slower, okay, and the pitch gets lower. And so it's really it really sort of has a very bizarre effect on the sound that you're hearing, okay. As well as that, we have this instrument called the mellotron, which is essentially being it's like a sort of organy sort of thing with tape loops instead of, you know, proper I don't know, stops or whatever, but it uses tape loops of real recorded instruments, and each sort of note therefore gets assigned its own bit of the tape loop, as it were, and so the like the flute, again, even if it wasn't sped up and slowed down or what have you, it would still sound weird, and it sounds very weird here. All right, when we get to the end, it all fades out, it all scrambles together, but you've still got that shum 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 sort of crotchet beat, keeping it sort of together and tidy, even though the whole lot is totally scrambled. All right, so lyrically, what have we got? Okay, we've got a John Lennon who at the time, I think was totally disillusioned and totally exhausted. We kind of see precursors of these lyrics in things like Help, where you've got, you know, look, this whole thing's getting beyond me, it's getting out of control, I'm not really coping all that well with all this fame and what have you. Okay, we've got Paul McCartney's songs like Drive My Car, for instance, which is essentially, you know, about, you know, people just kind of being used, you know, celebrities kind of being used by sort of hangers-on for, you know, for their own material gain. Okay, we've got John's Nowhere Man, which kind of like describes really his sort of state of mind whenever he was at home. There are accounts, you're not really sure how true they are. A guy called Peter Brown, who was one of their assistants, I'm not going to get sued hopefully, but he wrote a book that was very sort of, I suppose, scandalous at the time, particularly about John Lennon. And you know, the fact that he just used to get totally zoned out on whatever substances he was using at the time, you know, and sit on a settee and you know, just totally vegetate. Okay, and you can understand that why you would go from such bizarre extremes of being in the US and you know just being sort of shuffled around from city to city to city, get screamed at and you know and chased and God knows what, and just be totally exhausted, to going back to this total sort of vegetative state. Okay, you've got John Lennon's religious comments, which he made on the radio. He made to a newspaper in England. Okay, it was a very long interview. I've actually got a copy of that interview somewhere. You can read it in a book called The Lennon Companion. Which, by and large, you know, people may not have necessarily agreed with what he was saying about Christianity, but they, in this country at least, you know, he was allowed to have his opinion. In America, a country and western radio station that never, or very rarely at any rate, played any Beatles records, suddenly announced that they weren't playing any Beatles records and organised mass burnings. You know, there were the loony fringes like the Ku Klux Klan that were picketing the Beatles because the Beatles had made, they were very sort of, they had their hands tied. They were encouraged by their management, i.e. Brian Epstein at the time, not to speak out about, you know, certain political events that were happening at the time, such as the civil rights movement and what have you, because, you know, that would alienate too many people. Okay, but nevertheless, they did try not to play in segregated theatres, but their hands were very much tied by what they were saying. Okay, and you know, suddenly all this sort of crazy thing blew up about we're burning Beatles records because of John Lennon's opinions on religion at the time. Okay, there are also various other threats and things that went on. Some very nasty incident in the Philippines, for example, where they'd decided that they wanted to keep a day off when they'd been, and on that day off they'd been invited to some important function, sort of at the last minute by the Filipino president's wife, who felt snubbed when they said no, we're keeping our day off, and they lost all the goodwill there. And you know, and they were sort of, you know, again, the police decided that they were not really going to do their utmost to try and protect them against screaming hordes of fans and what have you, which and scenes, you know, crowd scenes turned very nasty. So you've got all this, and it's all condensed into Strawberry Fields Forever, and as well as that, you've got this bloke trying to come to terms, you know, even, you know, years later, 7 years later or so, with the loss of his mother. Okay, Strawberry Fields itself was the name of an orphanage not very far from where John Lennon lived as a child. Okay, and And then you suddenly realise, well, actually, you know, this is not like Strawberry Fields, man. Like, you know, let's take a pill and, you know, zone out and whatever. It's suddenly real. Okay, you've got this person that is orphaned forever. That's what he's saying. He's couching his words because, as I've just said, he wasn't really allowed to speak his mind. Okay, and so he's couching his words very, very carefully. And suddenly you realise what a clever bloke this guy is. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to Strawberry Fields. I'm revisiting the loneliness of my late teens. I'm going into this kind of, you know, zone where, you know, it doesn't matter what's going on around me. Here I am, and I'm lost, I'm alone, and I'm afraid. I'm bereaved, I'm bereft. Okay? And so, living is easy with eyes closed, misunderstanding all you see, is talking about this kind of nowhere man state of mind. Okay? But it's getting hard to be someone. Because I can't say what I want, I can't, you know, I've got these opinions, I can't say them. Okay? But it all works out, you know, Fab Whacker, you know, we're the Beatles kind of thing, you know, and, you know, don't worry about it, doesn't matter. You get the sense that actually it really did matter, but, you know, he kept a lid on it most of the time. But today, folks, I'm taking the lid off, okay? No one, I think, is in my tree. No one understands who I am. Okay? I mean, it must be high or low. That is, you can't, you know, tune in, but it's all right. That is, I think it's not too bad. There are definite rights. There are definite wrongs. I'm not allowed to speak out. I'm not allowed to say what I feel is right, what I feel is wrong, even though I know what's right and what's wrong. Okay? But it's all right. All right. Not too bad. That is, I think it's not too bad. In other words, I have to kind of take back what I'm saying all the time. I have to soften what I'm saying. Okay? When he'd made those comments, the religious comments, he had to do an awful lot of backtracking. Okay? And to try and kind of explain what he felt, but also lay it on the, you know, lay it on a bit thickly, okay, in order to try and pacify people, okay. So it's not just like just explaining, yeah, Christianity is on the decline, you know, and this is why I think it's on the decline. You know, we all deplore that it is on that it's on the decline. You know, we think it's terrible that there are more people coming to Beatles concerts than going to church. And really having to backtrack, and I get the sense that in this line, it's all right, that is, I think it's not too bad, that he's essentially kind of alluding to the fact that he's really backtracked and he's actually kind of sold himself out a little bit, okay? And so in this song, you've got the sort of scrambled, sort of, I suppose, yeah, drug influence in a way, existence of John Lennon, but it still makes sense. If you put it into context, it makes absolute, complete sense. Okay, and as I said, it fades out on this sort of, you know, real sort of scrambled, sort of musical background, which again, if you listen to the two stereo mixes, they're slightly different. One of them goes completely silent and then comes back in, whereas another one, I think it's the later one, sort of doesn't fade out completely and then comes back in. Okay, because again, I think people thought, what's this? Scrambled fade out ending. Oh, thank goodness that's ending. Oh no, it's coming back again. So, in a sense, it has a beginning, which is summarising all the musical material for the verses. You've got that lovely dang 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 bit, which is essentially squashing the whole chorus into 8 notes. And then no ending. Okay. You've got this jump, 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 jump kind of pulse going all the way through it. Okay. But no ending, all right? Paul McCartney's song, Penny Lane, on the other hand, has no beginning, but a very definite ending, okay? It also has this, this sort of dum, 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 dum. But at the speed that Paul McCartney's taking his song, it sounds happy-go-lucky. You know, you could almost imagine Noddy driving around Toyland, you know, dum, 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 and but in its own way, it was filled with just as much kind of technology as John Lennon's song. Okay, John Lennon's song used special effects and sounded like it, whereas Paul McCartney's song, because it's so the tune is so jolly, and here's another difference between the two. Okay, John Lennon's melodies are very much sort of one note sort of things. No one, I think, is in my tree. I mean, it must be high or low, and very, very stepwise movements. Whereas Paul McCartney's songs, the melodies tend to stay still, very rarely. Okay, which is why Paul McCartney claimed to have written the melody for "In My Life," because that is a much more McCartney-esque sort of thing. Da 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 da, and all the notes moving all the time. Okay, very rarely staying still. Okay, whereas John's melodies, you know, look at Imagine, for example. You know, da 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 da. Da, 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 and very little movement at all. Okay, Paul McCartney's song, on the other hand, nice jolly melody, moving around all over the place, lovely catchy thing. That pulse, dum 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 dum. Instead of taking us sort of into this kind of scrambled reality, is now sort of, again, it's leading us back into the past, but it's a kind of idyllic past. It's, you know, it's almost a past that, you know, you think, you know, sometimes you say how much you forget. Okay, we can all look back and remember the good old days, but actually, you know, if you were to go back to the good old days, you'd be looking even further back to find the good old days. And this is Paul McCartney's dilemma, really. Okay. It's still using zillions of special effects, as I said. You've got layer after layer after layer of piano on there, which, you know, some were speeded up, some were slowed down, and then they're all meshed together. Okay. The best sheet music-y version comes in this book. I'm sure it's been published before this book, but the New Beatles Complete. This is in 2 volumes. This is the 67 to 70 one. Okay, page 57, and here's Penny Lane in C major. Okay, prior to that, there's another very common version, which is in B flat major. It's only spread out over 2 pages. Misses out the sort of the lovely piccolo solo in it, which, you know, is really, you know, it is what makes the song. Okay. And funnily enough, that B flat sheet music, although it misses out the piccolo solo in the middle, has there was a very rare release of Penny Lane, which had some piccolo notes at the end, which went ba 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 ba, and the B flat version actually prints those notes. Go figure. the single, it was actually released. I think it's a DJ copy or something like that. It was actually, a very few copies of it were made, and it collects thousands of pounds if you can find it in decent condition. But there you go. So we've got this piece that is again over. There's zillions of special effects. The musical devices being used here are. If you listen to all the characters in the song, they all have their own little motifs. The banker has a very low sort of cello-y tuba sort of motive. The fireman's got clanging bells, for example. Okay, it's very idyllic. But the words, when you stop and think about them, are pure nonsense in a way. Okay, the tension that is actually coming is because we've got pouring rain. Each of the verses ends with pouring rain. Okay, in the chorus, we're told that Penny Lane is underneath blue suburban skies, which would suggest a lovely sunny day, like today, for example. Okay, so you've got lyrical tension between the verses and the choruses. You've also got what on earth are the characters doing in this song? Okay, the most obvious thing is the fact that it's the banker who never wears a Mac. Okay, a Mac. Unfortunately, it's not an iMac, it's a raincoat, okay? The B-flat sheet music had to, felt the need to put a footnote at the bottom to explain that a Mac was British slang for a raincoat, okay? So, it's the banker who never wears a Mac, but it's the fireman that comes rushing in from the pouring rain, okay? And at the end, the whole thing just gets... totally sort of screwed up. What are the verses at the end? Well, so what are the lyrics at the end? Let me have a wee look. Right. Penny Lane, there's a shelter in the middle of the roundabout. The pretty nurse is selling poppies from a tray. And though she feels as if she's in a play, she is anyway. Okay. In Penny Lane, the barber shaves another customer. The banker sits waiting for a trim. The fireman rushes in from the pouring rain. Okay, it's in its own way more nonsensical than Strawberry Fields Forever, and Paul McCartney feels the need to tell us that because he tells us all the time that it's very strange. Okay. Towards the end, it slams into a higher key for the final chorus, and then we get this very definite Penny Lane ending, which sort of, again, it has this sort of special sort of compressed note at the end, which is held on, okay, and fades out almost in a way like A Day in the Life, but not quite as dramatic. Okay, and there really are the tensions between John Lennon and Paul McCartney in a nutshell. It's what really in their solo careers it was still very, very evident. Okay, and the fact that John Lennon very much, he became bolder in what he said during his solo career, and you can look back on some of these songs that he wrote. Especially, he did an album called Sometime in New York City, and there are a few songs there where you think actually, he was involved with people that perhaps he ought not to have been involved with, and that there were more kind of political opinions of things that later on he felt the need to backtrack for. But he said what he thought, and it kind of got him into trouble. It kind of pinned him to a moment, okay? Whereas Paul McCartney could write probably a more convincing peace song than Imagine. Songs like Tug of War and Pipes of Peace are more convincing because they don't actually hit the nail right on the head. So they make sort of very convincing lovey-dovey peace anthems that we can all kind of identify with. Okay, Imagine, it's an absolutely timeless song and what have you, but it's too challenging, and it was kind of, I think EMI sort of prohibited its release as a single in the UK at any rate. I think it was finally released kind of after his death in the UK. They really, they felt the need to censor the lyrics on his album sleeves and all sorts of things like that because he was too much for some people. Okay. And his albums, they never really sold in the quantities that Paul McCartney's did, because Paul McCartney could kind of say things in a very wishy-washy kind of idyllic kind of way. Pipes of Peace, for example. We'd all love a more peaceful world, and his video was taking us back to the First World War and sort of reconciliation for that. And it, it's just in a way, yes, it's more palatable for people. It's not always entirely convincing, but I'm sort of getting myself sort of a bit kind of tongue-tied here, but it's just kind of softening the message, just enough, for it to be a more global thing, rather than John Lennon's very sort of dogmatic and sort of controversial points of view. Okay. So there we go. It's been another long video, I'm afraid, and it's just me rambling on. Okay, but I do hope that has kind of made you see more, not just Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane, but more the tensions that were in the group, because that's the thing, and that was the thing that was kind of alienating the fans. The fact that they were, by 1966 they'd stopped touring, and they were working less as a unified group and more pursuing their own thoughts and things. Even though the earlier songs were still very much written by John or Paul, there was more this sense of togetherness, which by the time of Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane had kind of almost gone, and it was too stark. It was, that single didn't make #1 in the UK, it made #2. And you could probably sort of see a whole sort of generation of fandom suddenly, being brought back down to reality. Okay, and that kind of those personality traits will continue throughout their solo careers. Okay, all right. Yes, I will end now. I will stop. Goodbye.